Welcome to Simon and Whiten, the podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian Whiten, joined as always by Mark Simon. Mark, please say hello.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
Well, the president is going to Asia, believe it or not, and we're more than a year and I guess a quarter, a third into the Biden administration. Feels like longer, but we're there, and he's finally going to go see our two, I guess, strongest allies, you would say, most important allies. Don't want to insult the Australians, but he's not going to Australia. He's going to Japan and South Korea. There'll be the usual descriptions and compliments and, we have an ironclad alliance and things are great. And actually things are, I guess, pretty good. As a conservative, I like the fact that there's finally a conservative government in South Korea. Japan always seems to have one, not on economic issues, but on security issues. But this sort of highlights the lack of what the administration is doing in East Asia. There's been no shift to the Pacific. There's been no increase in the military, despite the fact the federal government is spending money like it's going out of style. It hasn't led to a single extra submarine, extra destroyer, extra cruiser, God forbid an extra aircraft carrier in the Pacific, despite this growing threat from China, and also nothing economic. And Mark, I sort of roll my eyes. You talk to Asian diplomats, and some say, well, America needs an economic piece to engagement in the region, and shame on you for pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the Japanese still love to hit us with that. They think maybe we'll rejoin. So the administration has responded with this U.S. Indo-Pacific economic framework, but there's really just nothing to it as far as I can tell. So I don't know. What do you think about Biden's engagement with the region, what's going to happen, and whether we really need some economic thing or not?
First of all, TPP basically failed. And I remember, because I kind of like trade agreements. I mean, the multilateral stuff doesn't really get me all excited, but I think it's good. Trade's great. I think trade is how you cement ties and how people get rich and you lift up people's lives. You know what I'm saying? Give me a choice between sending an NGO into a small, poor village or sending a group of businessmen, and I'll tell you, everybody will choose. Everybody knows what's going to happen right away. Look, TPP, the problem with TPP is I still remember I read at least 5 of the economic impacts of TPP, and it was meaningless. It was really, there was nothing there. Maybe, I think the one had like it would make $5 billion a year difference. But then regular growth in just trade, just growing actual natural trade would have made like 3.5 billion, at the worst case scenario. So in other words, if we had a boom year, in other words, it means nothing. Look, trade happens between companies and between people. Government just needs to get the hell out of the way. You drop tariffs, you drop tariffs, you get other people to drop tariffs. You first, most importantly, get people to drop regulations, and you do well.
That's right.
Biden is going to go over. It's going to be all security all the time, which is probably not a bad thing. But the question is, will they address the elephant in the room, which is Taiwan? And, what are they going to do to solidify our relationships in the region? We have really, you did a good right to bring up Australia, but essentially it's basically in Asia right now. It's everybody against China and everybody. Like you said, thank God the South Koreans are finally, starting to look at this. I mean, of course, they've got the fat madman to the north who, they always have to keep an eye on, but they know China's
little rocket man.
Rocket man's always going to be a problem. Anybody, whether it's Rocket Man or Rocket Girl, his sister, if she takes over, they're always going to be a problem for the South Koreans. But they also know that China is a real problem for them as well. And, he's going to have to address everything. I know we talk about the Solomon Islands, the Guadalcanal, where the Chinese are trying to set up. Of course, they're trying to set up bases. They're not just down there for a reason. Yeah, that upsets the Australians, but it upsets the Japanese and the South Koreans just as badly. Because if you ever look where the Solomon Islands are, there was a reason the Americans fought the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1943. And that was because basically if you control the Solomon Islands and you control that stretch of sea, you cut Australia off from everything. It's over. And so I just think the thing is with Biden, he's going to Japan, going to South Korea, 50-50 if he pulls an H. Bush and goes in somebody's, stuff, I would assume it'll have the lightest schedule in history. In other words, I think the Japanese will be cooling their heels all the time, waiting for him to come out for 20 minutes and this and that. That's fine. We've got Air Force. We've got a big Air Force plane. He has to fly in it. It's really nice for the staff. Everybody gets excited about these trips. That's all it's going to be. I don't expect anything substantive. Hopefully, Austin will be along with him and the other defense guys. But right now, when you talk about leading from behind, as we are in Ukraine, where everybody's kind of setting the agenda but us, and we're playing catch up, I think we have caught up pretty well, but I think we're still not. I mean, Boris Johnson is the one giving speeches in front of the Ukrainian parliament, and right. We're the ones paying $33 billion for equipment, but but how much of a word do we have on that? The same thing in Asia. Basically, right now, I think everybody's looking at the Japanese as the leaders of the defense initiative there, but we're the one who has the aircraft carriers there. I from an economic point of view, expect nothing, though. It's going to be nothing. When you read the agreement, as you read when we were talking earlier, labor, sustainability.
Oh, I got it. Let me go through it really quickly here. So this is from the U.S. Trade Representative, puts out a statement after she goes to Singapore, wastes the Singaporean Prime Minister's time. He was a good sport, but I called it the Seinfeld economic framework, the framework about nothing. But here's the readout. Tai, this is the U.S. Trade Representative, highlighted the United States' desire to work with Indo-Pacific partners to establish a high ambition framework that advances resilience, inclusion, sustainability, and the interest of respective workers and entrepreneurs in the United States, Singapore, and across the region. So I read this and I'm like, this is like a framework for transgender-owned windmills or something. Sustainability, inclusion. I don't see anything about increasing GDP. You made a very good point, I think, which is, okay, tariffs are one thing, and I think, I'm actually more partial to them, especially as applies to China than some. But the deregulation part, which is really what caused the Trump boom before the Wu flu put an end to it. And if we could create a forum in East Asia that gives cover to governments to make those types of reforms, that's the way you could really juice the economy and stick it to the Chinese. But that seems completely beyond the constitution of Biden or frankly, some of the, hey, I love Japan. I think they're a great ally. They're quintessential, but they sure aren't free market capitalists. Well, at least not in that.
We have to understand they just don't believe it. Okay. That's the whole, at the end of the day, I blame everything in Asia on finance people, everything, because all they care about is getting into the system, and then they will find their way to make money with all the regulations and everything else. They'll bitch and moan about, there's so many regulations here, but they're happy to work within it as long as they can make their money. Just like a banker, whether it's 6% interest rate or 7% or 8%, they don't care because they've got their 100 basis point, 150 basis point margin on top of it. Now, of course, it means maybe less economic activity, so they care about that. But really, as far as their business goes, they're just moving on. We have inside the Biden administration probably the most hostile group to manufacturing, to oil energy, to fuel energy of anybody. Imagine having a conversation with the Filipinos, the Indonesians, the Malaysians about basically fossil fuels. Oh yeah, we'd like, you're already basically having power outages and your people sometimes don't have enough electricity to power the refrigeration. But how about let's not let a crisis go to waste, AKA Samantha Powers. And, why don't we just all go why don't we just all go solar? If they went to nuclear, maybe it'd be okay. But no, I mean, look, people, just so they know, nothing's coming out of this trip. Nothing. Not even security-wise. Lately, I'll give you a little bit of a scoop. It's going to start coming out. The Biden administration is now slow walking Taiwan arms purchases, from what I understand. I heard that.
Right. Well, and do you think just the stores of those, some of the things that they want to buy, this whole porcupine idea that tell Taiwan don't buy F-35s or stuff that's crazy expensive that'll take a long time to get to you and won't last. Buy anti-tank missiles, buy anti-ship missiles, buy mines, sea mines, land mines, things like that. That all that stuff is going to Ukraine, and therefore Taiwan is going to have to get in line.
Yeah, I've heard the M109s are maybe not be going. Those are the big self-propelled artillery. Somebody told me that the other day. Maybe those are going to Ukraine, but I'm not so sure. But I always think I'm one of these guys that believes if you call up a defense contractor and say we need more, I've never heard him say no.
That's right.
Please,
That's
no,
right.
we don't want to sell you more guns and weapons. No, 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 that's not what we do. But I think the real problem is, to be honest with you, is that, again, look, they're decommissioning ships because they're going to say we're going to divest, so we can't invest.
Oh God, yeah.
What? I mean, I spend enough time in Asia. I see enough defense guys. It's hard now. You don't see the guys in Japan that I used to see all the time because I can't get up there, or Singapore. But they're all rolling their eyes. I know those guys. They're like, whatever. And that's why the Japanese, who are moving weapons, people forget this, those small islands above Taiwan, Japanese are putting a lot of stuff down there now.
Right.
And I think people see the trigger now between Taiwan and China. I think people see Japan being the trigger as much as the U.S.
That's the thing. Everyone's expecting this would-be war, which hopefully never happens, to be just China attacks Taiwan. And it's, sometimes you can actually predict the cause of a war with accuracy, but often, I don't know, it's not, everyone, contrary to the view that Pearl Harbor was a complete surprise, it was in the sense that the target was a surprise, but everyone knew that war was coming with Japan. They just thought the Philippines would be first, but there was an elaborate plan. I think it was War Plan Orange that was going to be implemented if, as expected, the Japanese attacked the primary American possession in the Pacific in 1941, which was the Philippines. Now, they got it the day after Pearl Harbor, so that's why it was a surprise. But similarly, in war with China, I don't know, maybe it's not an attack that's on Taiwan. Maybe it's a preemptive attack on Okinawa and U.S. bases there that would bring the U.S. and Japan in, but maybe China thinks that even if we're in, we're not really in, that we'll just do something token. So I sort of agree with what you're saying there, that this may not play out the way everyone seems to think.
I think it's incredibly. I've heard so many different things, and I've actually been to 5 or 6 of the post sessions for the war games over there, just largely because they're nice guys, and you agree not to talk about it. But I'm not one of these ones that sees it so clearly. I think basically we have to really look at the Chinese now, and they're not as capable as we think we are, as we learned with the Russians. And I think it could go a lot longer and could be a lot deadlier. And I think, quite frankly, I'm hoping that people are fully understanding that. But let's get back to this trip. The trip's nothing. It's going to be a waste of time.
One little footnote on the Solomons and Guadalcanal, which was, of course, a huge fight for the United States Navy Marine Corps team. Very, very bloody. I can't remember. Was it the Marine Corps or the Army? It was MacArthur's region, I think.
I think both of them, actually. But Army.
Yeah. Reading a book now on the Coastwatchers. We were predominantly Australian. Couple of Kiwis, couple of odd Norwegian here or there, but people who were there spying on the Japanese behind enemy lines, sometimes with friendly natives and oftentimes with friendly natives that became less friendly as the Japanese kept winning. But great book. I'll put it in the YouTube description of this video. I can't remember the full title, but good stuff. On that note, switching gears completely, although there is a China angle to this, of course, is Disney. And we talked about this with Twitter. Everyone's looking at the political angle and the politics and who made the right decision, who made the wrong decision, whether you should assuage your commie employees or not. But Disney also seems like a very poorly run company. If you look at the stock, it doesn't pay a dividend. You think that is the exact type of company that would. Stable situation that just generates cash, ought to throw it off to shareholders, not a steep growth company where people are going to be attracted to amazing capital gains because there aren't any. But what do you think? Good run company, badly run company?
I think it's an awfully run company. I think Bob Iger is the most overrated CEO ever, largely helped because his wife was basically the dean of the USC journalism school. So there was nothing but good press. Bob Iger's last 5 or 7 years have been a disaster for shareholders. Myself being a shareholder a few times, and then giving up and then getting motivated and then going back. Let's look at what Disney has done in the last. I think if you look at, if the Soviets will live with the 5-year plan, I'll live with the 5-year plan. If we look at the last 5 years, or 2 5-year plans, last 10 years, Disney's done okay, but the last 5 years, 4 years, has been a dog. It's been nothing. But why is that? It's because they don't do anything. Let's face it. What's the last creative thing Disney really did? Okay. what's the last? I'm sorry about that. What's the last creative thing Disney really did? Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but who drove Pixar? Steve Jobs. People forget that. That's why Jobs became such a big holder in Apple. Steve Jobs, because they were part of owner of Pixar. Apple, and so Steve Jobs. So Jobs basically gave them all that freedom and all that excitement that you have in Silicon Valley. And for those who don't know, we actually had an animation company for about up until almost a year ago. I'm saying not even a year ago. We had 500 people in that company, and we did work for a lot of people. Nobody was ever impressed. I was always amazed. Nobody was ever impressed with Disney, because what they said is Disney just buys the IP. Let's look at some of the things that Disney recently had. Nothing. There's nothing. They did Jungle Book, okay, the cruise, which they basically made a movie out of a cruise ship with The Rock and some other person. I watched the movie the other night. It was awful. It wasn't very good. They got their social justice thing in there halfway through.
Oh, of course.
Of course they did. And then, but what else has they done? They were brilliant. It was a brilliant move to buy the Marvel franchise. Okay. And they bought Star Wars, but they're buying stuff. In other words, it's kind of like a guy who buys things. Now, maybe you could say Iger was brilliant because he bought these things and he's making a lot of money of them, but he paid pretty good for them. You know what I'm saying? And the fact is, in my mind, they are a company that is based on IP. This is a company that you had a visionary there in Walt Disney. I mean, there's a few people out there that are like that. Even Stan Lee at Marvel with all these characters, because people forget he didn't come up with all of them, but he picked the ones to champion, and, DC Comics and all these things. These people knew what they were doing when they were setting up, because they had a vision and they knew how to bring talent together. I don't think Disney knows how to do that anymore. I mean, look at Pixar. Pixar has had nothing. Everything Pixar turns out is like, it goes through committee. Lasseter got done in because basically he was sexually harassing somebody, which is not good, okay? And it shouldn't happen. But what did they do? What was their response? I happen to know their response. Their response was they stripped everybody of any type of authority for creative and gave it to the committee, and they've turned out crap ever since. Pixar with Marvel Comics and the Avengers, and people love it, Spider-Man and all this stuff. That's not their content. They're just making stuff. But my point is, imagine buying a company, and it's supposed to be a creative company, and all they do is they don't have any ideas themselves. They just buy everything. Mm-hmm. And then they're trapped in these awful relationships with nations. For example, in Paris, they've got a trade union there, and
of course they
got a trade union in Paris that basically lines them up every month. You know what I'm saying? And defiles them. I mean, gets what they want. So it's the Paris
like 8 weeks of paid vacation a year.
Yeah, they're never going to get profitable. Orlando. And of course, California, they make pretty good money on. They've got a few other things that go on. But who set that up? You're really going to credit Bob Iger with Disneyland and Disney?
Yeah, well, as we've learned recently, it was Walt Disney himself who got the sweet deal from Florida.
What Disney has managed to do, and I know this sounds really odd, but they've managed to basically now turn off enough people that there are people who won't go to Disney World now and Disneyland. A lot of Christians don't want to go there because they don't want their kids going there. Just like there's a lot of feminists who don't want their daughters running around, in pink little, Disney princess things. You'll experience that one day. We experienced that where all the mothers are upset because you go to a birthday party and there's 50, princesses there, whatever they're all wearing the Disney stuff because that's what they want to be. But it's almost impossible to keep them out of your pocket. But the point is that this is a company that's not particularly well run. They're not creative, and they're not churning for the shareholder. It is phenomenal to me, really, to be perfectly honest with you. It's phenomenal to me that this company um, has the management reputation that they have, because they haven't done that much with anything. In other words, I want to see people creating things, not making Jungle Book 2, not taking Star Wars and really just making all these ridiculous things off it that aren't doing as well as they think they are. I mean, and you look at it now, we've got Thor, and now they're making this. Of course, people they're maximizing the IP. How about creating some IP? How about creating some stuff? In fairness to Netflix, who was having a miserable time, and Hulu and some of these other guys, they do create some stuff. They do have some new people coming up. What does Disney have that's new? Nothing. There's nothing coming out of there except for something completely political correct that they're not interested in. You know what I'm saying? It's just ridiculous. So I tell everybody, give Disney a hard pass. I think they're finished. I'm not going to invest in them again. I don't see anything happening. And now the company's been taken over. But I'm not saying this because of the culture wars, but that's what brought me to the conclusion.
Yeah.
These people.
Well, it was so dumb. It's like these companies. Saw BP. I can't remember if it was 15 or 25 billion is the cost of storming out of Russia. Now, maybe eventually the government would have required that. Maybe their shareholders would have supported that, but they made the decision on a weekend, and now they're out $25 billion. Now, Disney, entangling with not just the governor, but also the state legislature of Florida. What is the cost of that change in who controls the municipality where they're located? It's going to cost Disney $1 billion a year. I mean, that's real money for a company of that size. And just to do that flippantly without any thought because of your woke employees, it's just, I wonder if we are at the forefront of, first of all, just because of where we are in this economic cycle, that we've hit peak corporate earnings, that people are going to pull back on consumption because inflation is out of control and because the Fed is no longer injecting all of this cash into every little corner of the economy. But in addition to cyclical trends, that we are reaping the harvest of mediocrity. The PC surge in corporate America didn't begin with Donald Trump as a reaction to him. It really got underway pretty hardcore under Obama, where there was so much PC, so many diversity hires, so much inattention to merit, to qualifications, real qualifications, not just credentials, to experience. And I wonder if, across the board, airlines, entertainment, you name it, where we're seeing just the product of bad management.
What does Elon Musk not have? He doesn't have a PR department. What did Steve Jobs really not deal with very much? A PR department. What did Jimmy Lai, my boss, not have? A PR department. Who was powerful inside these organizations at Microsoft in the past and at other companies when Obama was there? It wasn't the HR person. It was the engineers who wanted to do things. It was people who came up and said, hey, we're going to go into this section of robotics. Let's go out and hire the best guys in robotics. Okay. And they went out and hired them. And then when somebody came in, they'd say, oh, we don't have enough diversity in the robotics section. Okay, you guys go out and get me some other engineers who we can plug in here. But that didn't drive the business. One of the things about Disney, again, to pick on Disney, and I enjoy picking on Disney, is look at what happened with Disney in terms of recently all their political work, and they hired this new person. The person she's an Obama, Biden public affairs, public relations person. Well, she's the person that's going to work with the company. That person should be a back office person. Why do we know who this person is? Why do we know who all these top people are? The most important people at Disney should be the creative people. And they're not, because they're not a creative company anymore. You're not. Why? Let me tell you one thing that happened one time. I was involved in a company one time, and they put out 3 reports, okay, for their annual reports. All 3 reports talked about their cost-cutting exercises. And then they were talking about how well they're cutting costs and well they're cutting costs. And the boss said, dump them. Because he said that the accountants are in charge now. And sure enough, he was right. You know what I'm saying? We sold our stake. But the point being is that the PC stuff I thought there was a pretty good tale that was said the other day, and I'll credit him. Douglas Murray said it. We had this conceit in the conservative movement that once these kids got out of their gender studies programs, once they got out of all their other left-wing stuff, they would go into the real world, and in the real world, they would have to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
Not the case.
Yeah, I thought
They
that
are
too, but
having
I was
to
wrong.
adjust quite a bit, but they are finding places for themselves. It's like at universities. The greatest thing that's going to happen at universities in the coming years is they're just going to get rid of all the fluff. The problem is a lot of the fluff has made themselves very difficult to get rid of. You know, it's like at the height of its trouble, the New York Times, before they started really turning it around, they still had in their corporate affairs and they still had 10 people, 15 people. Well, the way they were doing, now they've turned it around and they've recognized and they don't have that many people anymore. But my point is that I think when you look at companies now moving forward, the point is there's a lot of people who are out there. I was listening to somebody the other day. Have you ever heard the term bullshit jobs before? There's a book called
No,
Bullshit Jobs.
it's ringing. Yeah, well, no, I have heard of it. I don't know much about it,
Yeah,
though.
I got to find it and read it. I just read an article from it, and the guy says there's a lot of bullshit jobs out there. You know, I mean, there's a lot of jobs. If you look at corporations, how many people, do you look at? I mean, I remember we took over a company one time. I went in there, and fortunately, we had the good fortune. It wasn't that many people, but there was like 7 people in this liaison office, and they were like, their job was to liaison with different ports and different. They had no job. They had zero job, and they were sitting in Hong Kong. 3 expats probably costed us $600,000 a person. They
Jesus.
were part of a coordination center.
Mm.
And my boss came in there and he's like, these people do nothing. It's costing us $2 million a year. And they knew they had bullshit jobs. I remember when one of the guys left, he told me he can't believe his boss talked him into coming over because he said it destroyed his career in the company. He said, I lost 3 years here. Because he said, basically it was just, everybody knew they do nothing. You know what I'm saying? They're like the people at the end of the Zoom call that thanks everybody, but we were just thinking, you know what I'm saying, whatever, that's what they were. And there's a lot of companies like that. And I look at Disney, I look at a lot of different companies out there, and I think they have to look through there and think, what do they do? I'll give you some other examples too. News Corp.
Mm-hmm.
I look at News Corp, used to own their shares, their stock, their results come out in about an hour. Now I follow them. I used to invest in them. News Corp, we used to invest in the New York Times. New York Times did pretty well. I look at the Washington Post now. The Washington Post now has got people everywhere because they're just milking Bezos's cash.
Right. It's not just because I'm a right winger and they're left wing. So I used to get some crap in the Bush administration because I didn't read the Washington Post. And my view was if there's an important article or something I need to see, someone will send it to me. And that was when Fred Hyatt was there. And sometimes actually you'd come across an op-ed I'd agree with. And then they went completely nuts. And in the Trump administration, no one ever criticized me for not reading the Washington Post. And I never got anything forwarded to me. Now, that doesn't mean they're not making money, although I don't think they are. You know more about this. But it just seems that the relevance there has been swirling in the bowl for a long time.
Well, I mean, look, it's very hard for everybody. I mean, you guys remember Quartz? Quartz is now for sale. They sold it to the Japanese for $86 million. 4 years later, the Japanese are selling it for $10 million. I got a call on it from somebody the other day. It was like, no, we don't have that. We're not buying Quartz. Lee Newspapers is being bought by Alden, which is the big hedge fund. You know what I'm saying? And that's upsetting people. Look, media is in real trouble. When you talk about whether you like left wing or right wing, I think the New York Times is. I think in a way, the results just came out this morning at 7 a.m. Besides a stupid move in buying the Athletic, which I'll never figure out, $500 million in cash. They could have done so much with that, like give it back to the shareholders or do a few things. I don't think it's going to work out at all. It's already doesn't look like the numbers are already horrible. But the overall core product is pretty good. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in other words, that they have a very good Death Star type machine. Now, it turns out stuff that I'm not always thrilled about reading, but they do a very good job. And I always tell people, if you ever try to place ads in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, New York Times is much easier to deal with. They have a much better business environment. I've dealt with both
That
of them a
surprised
couple
me.
of times.
I
No,
found
it's
myself reading them more during the Ukraine war because it's they're partial to Ukraine, which is fine. So am I, but they are a little less in the cheerleading business and more in the reporting business. Whereas the Wall Street Journal, to the detriment to their coverage of business, which is the primary reason for purchasing the paper, it's just a little bit too much rah rah.
No,
And
Murdoch.
yeah,
That's Murdoch. I mean,
hmm
before Murdoch is the one who wanted to compete with the New York Times with them. So they've got
hmm
that ridiculous Sunday section where it's like Wall Street Journal culture or style, whatever.
This is the one that
Wall
had
Street Journal
Stephen
has got
Colbert, the left wing quote unquote comedian, on the cover, as if their readers want to flip through a glossy with a bunch of pictures of, Tiffany, and then you get to read a 3,500 word story on Stephen Colbert.
it is nobody cares. Um, Nobody wants anything. It's kind of like Fox. I remember telling Fox one time, a guy at Fox told me this a couple of months ago. He said, everybody talks about the advertising boycott hurting, and it does hurt. He said, but Tucker's still $8,000 for a 30-second commercial. CNN is $4,000, and for whatever reason, MSNBC is like 3,500. In other words, the thing is, that's why Mr. Pillow is always at Fox, because their
Right,
viewers buy stuff. It's
right.
the reason why the truck guys actually broke the boycott, because I think it was Dodge broke the first one. They first went back, and they were getting a lot of traction. And Ford goes, "We got to be there too." And then Chevy said, "We got to be there."
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that. If I was Tucker, I would drive a Dodge all day long or something like that. I'd do my video from a Dodge. Talk about how great my Dodge is all day long. Just have everybody complaining and stuff like that. I've dealt with boycotts in my life. I know how to handle them. And basically, Fox is. What do you say to them? They got the highest rating in town. But
Right.
but then again,
Well, it's also, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I think it was you pointed out to me several, because Tucker, there was a boycott in 2020 and then I think in 21 an attempt, including by the New York Times and its mob of Twitter keyboard warriors. But just Fox News, which is just one island in the News Corp archipelago, $3 billion annual revenue, and two of that comes from carriage fees. So a third is advertising. You don't want to give up a third of your revenue. But for Tucker, ironically, if you drive advertisers away, it cranks up his ratings, which means that Fox could justify higher carriage fees, and also gives Tucker and his guests more time, fewer commercials during the program.
look, I got to tell you, I had a company. We had a company that was advertising, and for some reason, we basically put it into programmatic advertising, what we're looking for, and the ads ended up with Rush Limbaugh. This was a number of years back. So they wrote the company. I was on the board of the company. They wrote the company, and they're sitting there, and this guy calls out of the blue. I get somebody. Do you know you're advertising on Rush Limbaugh? I go, and you have to understand, I'm at Apple Daily where I'm getting boycotted all day long. You know what I'm saying? He goes, you're advertising his radio station? And I go, no, I didn't know that. He goes, well, do you know what he does? And I go, yeah, I know Rush. I listen to him every once in a while. And he goes, but that's the type, but people are going to boycott your business. And I said, if you try to boycott our business, if I even see you near it, I said, I will sue you, which you can, by the way. I will sue you for basically defamation and everything. Now, I'd probably lose, but it would. And I know I sound ridiculous like that, but that was the only thing that you could say to the guys. Look, if you're going to come and basically call me an evil person for just, running ads, and I said, I have no control over it. I give them my thing, and that's that. But what I know is this. See, they couldn't go to the programmatic and then say you can't advertise on Russia's station, because you got all kinds of intimidation, extortion. You just can't do those things. It's kind of a myth. That's why if you ever see some of these boycott organizations, you know what I'm saying? They're very close about how they do stuff. Rush did a very good job busting these guys up. Fox doesn't have they don't need to, but because you're right, they have the carriage fees. But if somebody calls you up, but imagine that's the world that we're in today, where some guy calls you, and it wasn't just one time. They call a number of times and say, we notice your ads are appearing on this radio show, and we think you're supporting racism and all these things. And what if your customers found this out? Well, if the customers found this out, I'm going to sue you for defamation if it's coming from you. And they're like, because they're used to dealing with people who back off.
Well, and that's why the Standard is so great that Musk doesn't have a PR department, because the standard advice from a PR weenie would be like, oh, well, yeah, you better do what they say and pull your ads, and let's make sure everyone knows about our diversity program.
That's very true. Look, the only PR people I really believe in are crisis people and what I would call strategic advisors at the very top. Keep everybody else out of the daily stuff. One of the problems you have in every organization is people try to make themselves important. And the PR guys are always in there telling you this is how it plays. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Have you know the Indian tractor, Japanese tractor, Kabuto or whatever it is?
That's a Kamutsu. I'll look it up.
They do the local tractors. I know this is a true story. They were told by their advertising company not to advertise with Fox. So they pulled their ads from Fox, and their sales went like this. And who got on the phone with them was all their dealers saying, what are you doing? People who buy tractors are people who watch Fox, And so that was the whole thing. I mean, so the thing is, and why'd they do that? Because some PR guy said, you know what I'm saying, you shouldn't do it. Disney's the same way. I hate to go back to them. Disney makes their money on families. Families go to Disney, okay? Unless they're very strange older men who go to Disney by themselves.
Michael Jackson.
I've never understood that. But Disney is a family business. Disney is movies that families want to watch. And you've got people there that are completely after. They hate their customers. They really do. They really do. That's why Ben Shapiro is not always my favorite cup of tea, and I don't think he'll do it right. But he is right. I mean, you look at some of these Christian movies and some of these other things coming out, they're going to find a market there. I'm not so sure that Mark Wahlberg's Father Stew, which is rated R, is going to be the market for Disney. But other people will start to find stuff. It'll start to show up. Right. I mean, it's starting to happen now.
All right. Well, on that note, we're out of time for this episode of Seven White. Tune in again for another episode soon. Thanks.